I'm going to welcome everybody to Book Carnival. My name's Anne, and we're delighted tonight to have Saul Lelchuk. I'm probably ruining the name, but I'm going to use it anyway, with One Got Away. And the delightful, and having gone to a party last night, Maddie Margarita, who's going to be interviewing him. So that's going to be very interesting. And you know, of course, the main character in here has a bookstore. So I have a vested interest in this interview. It's all yours, Maddie.
Okay, well, thank you, Anne. We threatened Anne earlier that we would poll her on some of, if she would have the same reactions as Nikki Griffin in similar situations. So we're sure that she would. So we'll just move forward on that. But thank you for having us here at Book Carnival. I'm Maddie Margarita, and I'm here with Saul Lelchuk. Saul holds a BA in English from Amherst College and a master's degree from Dartmouth College. He currently divides his time between Oakland, California and Hanover, New Hampshire, where he teaches graduate creative writing at Dartmouth. Save Me from Dangerous Men, Saul's first book featuring bookseller and private investigator Nikki Griffin, who, by the way, you never want to cross, was named a USA Today bestseller of 2019, a Booklist Top 10 crime debut of 2019, a Kirkus Best Mystery Thriller of 2019, a Hudson's Bookseller Best of the Year, and was shortlisted for a Barry Award. Did we miss anything, Saul?
You got everything.
Got everything.
You got every one of them. Yeah.
Holy moly, you must have like a trophy case in your house. But his series has been optioned for film and television, and his latest book, One Got Away, is hot off the presses. So welcome, Saul.
Oh, thank you so much. Great to be here. And thanks so much for hosting us tonight.
And my pleasure.
And by the way, and you nailed the last name, which puts you in a very elite crowd. There's very few people who get that unprompted. So
that's
well done
my
on
Chicago roots.
There we go. There we go. They're working.
There you go. So how is the tour going, Saul? How's the book tour going?
It's been fun so far. Been trying to cover every sort of virtually geographic area of the map, I suppose. So we did a launch with Books Inc. up in Berkeley. Had a conversation with a Poison Pen in Scottsdale last week. Had a conversation with one of the Houston mystery shops, Murder by the Book, yesterday. And then off to the East Coast next week. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I am doing a great job traversing the country without actually ever getting out of my seat.
This sounds ideal for a writer. So this book release is a little different from Save Me from Dangerous Men. It's a different time. A lot has happened between now and then, and a lot happened for Nikki from the beginning of Save Me from Dangerous Men and One Got Away. So why don't you tell us a little bit about where Nikki is, where she came from, and where she is at the beginning of One Got Away. What's happened to her? And
absolutely. So Save Me from Dangerous Men, as you said, it introduced the character. And to me, from the moment I thought of Nikki, I knew that I needed her to have kind of two sides. I wanted her to sell books by day, and I wanted her to love the job. That's not just another vocation for her. She's very passionate about it. She loves having someone walk into the bookstore, maybe looking for a specific book, oftentimes having no clue what they're actually looking for, and she'll happily walk them around the shelves and try to pick some perfect titles for them. And that's satisfying and gratifying for her. But there are problems that books cannot always solve. I should watch my mouth in front of a bookstore owner, but occasionally Nikki will bring someone who's been hurt or threatened or frightened up to a little shabby unmarked office she keeps above the bookstore. And that's where she engages in some out of the dotted lines work of her PI and her vigilante habits. So that's who the character is. In the second book, One Got Away, I have it begin a year after the first one left off. We see Nikki back with her boyfriend, who is formerly a Berkeley grad student, Ethan, and now the relationship, we learn, has been going well. He's happily teaching at Berkeley. They're happily dating. He is pressuring her to move in with him, and she's a little unsure whether she should say yes. partly because of the fact that she happens to be a rather independent spirit. I also, start the book off, One Got Away, with a case that Nikki is called in to take on. So we see her as the book opens, being brought down to a very fancy San Francisco hotel where a fellow named Martin Johannesson, who's a scion to one of the real old money California, San Francisco families. And they're kind of blue blood, pharmaceutical fortune. And he and his several siblings have become concerned that that his mother is being blackmailed by a very charming, very charismatic con man calling himself Dr. Jeffrey Tyler Coombs. He claims to have an Oxford education. There seems to be some doubt about that, but there is less doubt about the fact that he has been transferring large amounts of money from this elderly matriarch of the family to his own bank accounts. And so Nikki is hired to pursue him and to kind of warn him off. She soon realizes that no one is being completely honest with her. And as she starts to talk to the different Johannesson siblings and then to begin chasing the con man up and down the state of California, she starts to suspect that there's actually something much more sinister going on than a simple con, and that there have been actually maybe lives taken and a crime committed that makes her kind of vigilante protective instincts kick in a very different gear than she had originally thought. So that's where we start off in One Got Away.
So Nikki is an interesting character. She's an interesting character to read. She must have been a really interesting character to write. She's tough. She's physically tough, tougher than maybe Ethan, her boyfriend. But that's just my interpretation. And yet she also has that side where she's concerned about other people. And how did you decide, where did she come from? And I know you said that you wanted her to have those two sides, but how did you choose the bookstore owner? And how did you decide to make her like Jessica Jones meets The Equalizer meets Anne Saller?
So to me, it seemed and that is a good composite of characters.
And I'm going to write that under your name from now on. Yeah.
Okay.
I think, for me, when I thought about the character, the two sides seemed to fit really well. I think part of it certainly was very selfish. I'm sure I'd just grown up, just absolutely loving the California detective tradition. As a kid, I read every Chandler and Hammett book that I could get my hands on and so forth. And so when I was kind of thinking about ways, what I wanted to do for a first book, I felt it would be a lot of fun to get to kind of follow in their footsteps and come up with this character who was a bookseller and yet did the PI work as well. So that's kind of, that's how I envision Nikki. She was a pretty normal girl up to sixth grade when her family is attacked in this very kind of brutal tragedy. And that sends her spinning in a very different direction. I think without that, Nikki probably would have ended up leading a fairly normal life. But this sends her into a different orbit. She has her younger brother, Brandon, who witnessed this tragedy. And, he has been, I think, more subject to its influences than Nikki has. He's maybe not made of as strong material as she is. And so he struggles with drugs. He struggles with addiction. And in a way, he is kind of the Achilles heel of Nikki because she loves him and she needs him and she looks out for him. And in this second book, we see him kind of back on his feet and he's, leading a much more normalized life, which I think matters to her more than just about anything else. So that's Nikki in a nutshell. That's, what I wanted to do with the character and who I wanted her to be. You mentioned the toughness, and I think that's another aspect. I wanted her to be tough. I didn't want that to come at the cost of, an emotional core. I never wanted to write a character who was, only there to, take out 10 people in a room and then go and, mow down the next group of people and, never shed a tear and never have a second moment of self-doubt. Nikki actually, I think is subject to the same emotions that most of us are. She has, worries and fears about everything from her relationships to her professional work to the area that she lives in, what's happening to it with the tech companies, booming and everyone else struggling a little bit to stay on level ground. So she has the same, like, I think, fears and preoccupations that, many people do. The toughness to her is kind of a two-edged sword. It's something that matters a lot to her in her line of work. She's soft-spoken, but has the proverbial big stick, I suppose, and can wield it. But at the same time, sometimes her anger is a way of flashing out. And I think this is something that she's constantly struggling with. And there's moments in her life when her reactions have gotten her into trouble. And for her, I think it's a constant struggle to take this anger that has been with her since, what was done to her parents, from a young age, and to moderate and to, fashion some sort of regulator for it, so that she's able to use it in the right situation and use it proportionally without flying off the handle. And I think she kind of knows about herself that that's going to be a lifelong battle. One of the characters in the book, Dr. Coombs, observes to Nikki, he says, most people tend to be far more afraid of what's under the bed than what they see in the mirror. But you're not. And I think that's a pretty true statement when it comes to her. I think what scares Nikki more than anything is the potential extremes of her own reactions.
I think it's interesting that you said that, because in the story, Nikki starts to enjoy the chase and her foe maybe a little too much. So I think we do see her vulnerability and we worry about her. As much as we want her to succeed, I think we also worry about her. And nobody worries about her but the reader in her stories, really, which makes us want to protect her, I think.
Absolutely. I agree completely. And I wanted in this book to, she identifies in this con man, and she starts to realize pretty early on that there's more to his story than maybe some have been giving him credit for, and there's more going on with them. But I really, I wanted them to kind of identify each other as kindred spirits in a certain way. He uses that phrase with her, that they are both people who operate outside of not just the laws, but also outside of, what is accepted in civilized behavior on a day-to-day basis. And they have very different motivations. And certainly he is acting, I think, in some ways from a much more selfish position, than someone like Nikki. But at the same time, I wanted him to kind of present this flash of a very different life and existence to Nikki, because she has, on the one hand, her boyfriend Ethan, and he wants to move in, and they love, watching old TCM movies and doing takeout Chinese on a Friday night, and that's kind of as good as it gets for them. And on the other end of the things, you have this very good looking, very charismatic, flashy, well-dressed stranger who seems to kind of present this potential doorway into like a very different world and existence for her. And I think that she can't help but think, what would things be like if I was with him and doing this instead of with him and doing that? And so I wanted to tease that out a lot during the story. And I really wanted the presence of Coombs to kind of challenge Nikki to look at who she is, and to really, as much as she doesn't want to feel that they share much common ground or similarity, to kind of challenge her a little bit throughout the book and make her ask herself, how much do we actually have in common, and what kind of outlaw am I actually?
Yeah. But, I was thinking about Nikki, and she's one of my favorite characters. And I wondered how you chose the story, the mystery for her, because this seems to have a lot more resonance than just having a random mystery. How did you choose to involve her with that family and then a mystery itself?
So there's a funny answer to that story, and it's kind of a slightly personal one, actually. We have good family friends, and their elderly father had a very successful medical practice in New York, and he had a private office on Park Avenue and everything, and had done very well. And very late in his life, he passed away several years ago, but very late in his life, he had a caretaker who was spending, as caretakers will with the elderly, more time with him than anyone else. And the children learned, this is much after the fact, that she had been taking huge amounts of money from him. And at that point, she fled and she was in a different country, and it was obviously difficult for them to do much about getting it back. But what fascinated me was his reaction when they sat him down and they said, "This is what's been done to you. You've been taken advantage of. Here are possible options for trying to, reach this person who's now, across a border." And he said, completely emphatically, he said, "Absolutely not. I won't allow a moment of that." He said, "She can have whatever she took, and I want her to enjoy it just as I enjoyed her company." And he wasn't out of his house or anything like that. He wasn't left destitute. And that was a real thing that he was saying. And so to me, what was fascinating about that, and it's deep kind of psychological, question mark, is should this guy maybe be allowed to say that? And to me, a con is not so interesting. Anyone can steal. Sadly, too many people do it every day. You open any newspaper in the world, and it's full of headlines about different cons that are being done, often at mass scale, to different people. That's less interesting to me. But what is fascinating is the reaction of the person who's fleeced, and for them to say, "No, I'm fine with this. This person can enjoy what was taken from me." That's kind of fascinating. So that stuck in my head. And then when I started building the Johannesson family, my first thought when writing the book was, what if there's a matriarch and her children are very upset that she's being conned? But what if it's a bit cloudier than that? And what if there's a little actual subjectivity layered into the story? And what if perhaps she doesn't feel quite the way that her children actually do about it? So that to me is why I came up with this particular case. But it was a lot of fun to do because I like trying to take a situation and look at it from an unexpected angle. And this is really what I was doing with this.
I kept thinking about Anna Nicole Smith and how all those people have three names, including your character. So I was thinking, haha, I know what's happening here. But I felt sorry for everybody in this a little bit, which, you are so mean, Saul. Nobody escapes your pen. I mean, Nikki gets challenged. I feel badly for Ethan because I'm not sure he knows what he's in for. And like you said, everybody's lying. So when you were laying this book out, how did you go about deciding when you were going to reveal what, and what was important for us to know when?
And that's, in my defense, I will say that Bartleby, the bookstore cat, actually does quite well in this narrative. So
okay, all right. Well, so you are not a totally.
He leads a quiet life.
Saul, thank you.
But I will admit I didn't want to make things altogether easy for anyone in the pages. Where's the fun in that? The book, it went through a couple of drafts, and so for me, for example, when I thought about reveals, there's four siblings here, and Nikki has interactions with each of them, and I think it's fair. I'm not creating any spoilers. I promised I wouldn't. I think it's fair to say that she learns that no one is telling her the absolute truth about everything. But in the first draft, there was just one. There was Martin Johannesson, who hires her, and he didn't have any siblings. And I was writing it, and something wasn't working, and I was trying to figure out, as I was drafting this book, what's not working about this. And I just realized I think that for this particular character, there's too much on his shoulders. And I also thought this character is not the best guy by any means. He's kind of peevish, and he's somewhat, I think, immature in some of his reactions, and he's just not a very pleasant person in many ways. But is he a real bad guy? Is he a monster? I don't know about that either. And so to me, I suddenly had the idea. I thought Martin needs to have some brothers and sisters. And then when I created these other characters, when I started raising this family, I guess, then it became, I thought, much easier for me as a writer to insert different reveals and to start to turning these different pieces together. It was a story that I think needed a couple more pieces. I was trying to create a puzzle, and I just didn't have enough to build out the landscape. And so when I went and grabbed a few more, and it made it much easier for me. In terms of the different, reveals for the book, the reader actually starts out knowing more than Nikki, because I have a very brief prologue, just a couple pages, that talks about this, crime that's been done. And there's a U-Haul found by police, and there's dead bodies in the U-Haul. And then it cuts away to Nikki, and we don't come back to that right away. But the reader knows there's something worse going on than Nikki does. And Nikki has to put some of those pieces together while she's doing what she was hired to do, which is chase and, find and locate this con man, Dr. Coombs. So she actually goes into, I think some of the reveals are Nikki drawing even with us in terms of her realizations about what's actually going on. And then, of course, maybe starting to pull ahead of us because she's Nikki Griffin, and she's able to, put 2 + 2 together in certain situations and form some hunches and take some guesses. But she doesn't get there right away. And I think that right up until the very end of the book, there's a few surprises left for Nikki as well in that ending. And I think that she even might make a few misassumptions about people and maybe not calculate everything about them right away. You can't make it too hard for your protagonist, because then you have a 600-page book and they don't end up solving the crime. But you also don't want to make it too easy. And that goes not just for your reader, but really for your protagonist too. You need them to be struggling page by page.
So when you added the siblings, were you thinking about your brother? Or
I can say this because it's his birthday tonight and he's at dinner, so I know he's not listening to this. But no, I'm happy to say that my brother's amazing. We have a great relationship. And he is we do not have the I think it's called in the book the kind of snake pit of jealousies and rivalries that Johannesons have to struggle with. They also have a few more $1 billion with us, so I suppose everything works out.
Yeah, so there's a balance there. That's good. So and you mentioned a little bit about the setting, about setting it up north, and so do you think your book, that story, could take place other places, or do you think that there are things in that book that are inherent or intrinsic to the Bay Area?
So it's funny you asked that. I'll give a reveal of my own, which I haven't actually said to anyone in a public conversation. I originally set the book half in the Bay Area and half in Mexico, and I had Nikki chasing this con man, through this resort town in Mexico, and we took a look at the first draft, we meaning myself and my editors, and we finally concluded that if you give up the Bay Area, you have to give up these secondary characters, which proved fairly popular to some readers, and you have to give up a lot of the setting of the bookstore, and it obviously makes it harder for Nikki to go back and forth. And so there's so I ended up relocating it to California completely. And that, it creates its own challenges. Just for example, she's down in Mexico and she happens to see a cigarette butt in an ashtray at a restaurant that this con man she knows he smokes this specific brand. And so it lets her know that he's somewhere. And that worked. That certainly worked. But then you get up to the Bay Area and find me a single restaurant that's going to allow anyone to light a cigarette within 100 feet of it.
That's true.
You can light other things, but not cigarettes.
Those don't usually come with the brand name on them. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so so it's kind of funny, but little details like that really force you to change a scene completely, and so I joked to my agent, I said, can I just do a find and replace, for, San Francisco instead of Puerto Vallarta or what have you. But it wasn't so easy because those little tiny details, she's approached in Mexico by a kid who's selling cigarettes and candy outside the airport. American kids do not stand outside airports selling cigarettes and candy. It doesn't happen. And so suddenly, again, boom, you have to, not just translate a scene, but potentially kind of rip up the floorboards on it. So now that she was back, to get at your question, now that she was back in the Bay Area, it ended up being a lot of fun for me because there's just no shortage of places to go. And for me, I wanted to send her also to some different spots than the first book in the series. And so she ends up trying to tail stolen car, and that takes her down to the kind of shady secondhand, car auction world, in Salinas, in San Jose. She's tailing someone and takes her up to the Santa Rosa airport in North Bay area. And so it was fun bouncing her around, and sometimes pretty briefly in other scenes, like when she ends up at this luxurious Monterey resort where Dr. Coombs is hiding out. I set a pretty big chunk of the book there. And that was, a lot of fun for me to be able to just continue using this landscape that just has so much, to not just, show what Nikki's doing, but maybe try to say a few things about what California is in the process. I know that's a big statement to be making. But yeah, I think that, certain moments, like the very end of the book when she's in this slashing rainstorm and she's driving her motorcycle up, Market Street in San Francisco, this kind of central artery of San Francisco. And she's seeing these, huge gleaming buildings, with these, tech companies, ubiquitous. We've all heard the names. And then, every doorway filled by homeless people sleeping. And, to me, that kind of moment, it's only a couple sentences, but it can kind of suggest and remind to readers, there are some issues here in this state, or probably most other states, that are not fully worked out and are not fully solved and are worthy of attention. And so if I can find those little places to suggest something larger about a place or about a setting, then I'm always going to take that opportunity.
Yeah. So, I mentioned Ethan before. Tell us a little bit about, I think this story, all these mysteries could happen without him, but I'm not sure she could be the same character without him, or she could be as sympathetic or relatable. So tell us how you decided to formulate Ethan and what you had to have in him to make him a good romantic companion for, or foil for Nikki.
Absolutely. So, they meet in the first book at a diner. Nikki has just carried out one of her vigilante jobs and goes in for some eggs over easy and toast afterwards. And she meets Ethan, who has just finished his dissertation, and he's in there with some friends. And from that first moment, they do kind of bond, I'd say, over a shared sense of humor and a shared love of literature. And I think even in their very first exchange, both of those things become apparent to both of them, and they like each other enough for her to give him her phone number, which surprises him, and invite him over for a date. So, for Nikki is someone who, at the time, she's in court-ordered therapy because of the overreaction she had that caused her previous boyfriend to dump her. And she's asking herself, questions. Am I going to be alone forever because of who I am? And is there anyone out there in the world who's a decent person, and yet able to, see into me a little bit and not run for the hills? And, she finds Ethan, and they hit it off, and he is, as another character says, he's a civilian, and there's challenges there. She's not comfortable revealing everything about herself, and she's certainly not comfortable revealing everything about her work, partly because she's protective of him. She wants to keep him out of whatever hot water she might be landing in. And also just because she is naturally pretty reclusive. And so that's one challenge for her. And it's certainly a different type of challenge for Ethan himself. But I think that they do make each other happy, and I think they enjoy their banter. And I think underlying that, banter, they are really bonded by this shared love of books and literature. And I think wanting the same things out of life in a very fundamental way. And so it's a relationship. I think what you said is absolutely correct. She wouldn't be necessarily the same person without that relationship. And I wrote it not knowing where it would go. When you write two characters in a relationship, it's literally like when you start a relationship, you do not know if this thing is going to last or not. I really mean that. You can, for me, like, I don't plot my books. I just try to kind of write them and see where things go. And so I didn't know when I wrote the character of Ethan, if he had legs and if he could kind of hang in there with Nikki, but he could actually. And so I think when one of the first questions my publisher asked when they were, about to make an offer for the series, they asked, is Ethan going to be back in book number 2? And I said, I hope so. I think he is. And they said, good, we like Ethan. And that, told me kind of loud and clear, this is someone who's worth, keeping around for multiple reasons. So yeah, I think he brings out a different side of Nikki. And I think also she is just someone who doesn't need, she doesn't need on a Friday night to be, dolled up going to the hottest new club or the most exciting, new hotel opening or something like that. She really is pretty happy with them, with the TCM and, Chinese takeout. And so, I think they share something of the same enjoyments and the same enthusiasms. And all those things, I think, are enough to keep a relationship working, at least into its first year.
So which character is more like you? Nikki or Ethan?
I wish I could say Nikki. I'd be such a cooler person if I could. We both ride motorcycles. We both love books. I think sadly that's where the similarities at least start to peter out. But I think, yeah, for as much as I regret saying this, and I would love to be giving you a contrary answer, but I'm afraid that I'm more in the Ethan camp.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
Yeah, interesting. Well, you made it through darkness, so I don't know. We'll see. The jury's still out on
as humanities.
Okay, and then I've always loved reading the books, and I'm always looking for her book referrals, because I think it's they say it's a window into the character. I think it's a window into the author, because I have a feeling you're sneaking some of your favorite books in there. So how do you go about deciding which books you're going to have her refer to people coming in?
And guilty as charged, certainly. So it depends a lot. I mean, I think for me, for example, a little girl walks into the, bookstore in one of the early scenes, and, Nikki recommends, A Wrinkle in Time. And to me, this girl reminds Nikki of who she was. This girl's in 6th grade, and she really reminds Nikki of who she was and might have been had life not taken her in a very different direction. And so I thought there was, there's a touch of irony in just picking that particular title, A Wrinkle in Time, off the shelf. But also I think that if you are a well-versed reader who's making a book recommendation for a child of that age, then you can, it's hard to go wrong, with that particular book. Nikki bumps into Mason, who becomes a bit of a sidekick to her. He's a kind of solitary and, a bit of an unhappy boy, certainly not his own fault, this unhappiness, as we start to learn. And she sees him, reading by a bench, and he's reading a book called Boy by Roald Dahl, which is, I've read everything by Dahl. I love him. But, that book particularly describes a childhood that is far from easy and far from enjoyable. And so to me, that book is a real thing. I think that if you're a boy of that age, it's you could definitely be reading that book realistically. But also, I think it's suggestive of who someone is, and to see him with that title, or later he's holding a Arthur Clarke sci-fi book, Childhood's End, and that's another title that I think can maybe say something about what someone's fears might be or what their worries might be when they're reading it. But it's also like a book that I certainly loved at that age, and I think many sci-fi fans or even readers in general have found their way to Arthur Clarke with a lot of pleasure. So whenever the moment presents itself, Nikki sees a building and it reminds her of a German pillbox in an Alistair MacLean novel, like Guns of Navarone style or something like that. So yeah, I think it's very fun to have a literary character and a book-loving character, especially if you are one yourself, because then you really can look for those different openings and ways to put the books into the narrative, not just within the shop when people come in, but also in her observations and what she's doing and seeing day by day when she's walking around on the streets. So when you're writing your book, well, did you feel any extra pressure writing your second book after the tremendous success that your first book had? I felt pressure. It wasn't about the success. It was about the number 2 thing, the sequel thing, and so many people told me that the second one has to be, good if you want people to stay invested in this series. And, that's scary to hear again and again. So I think that was, I did definitely feel pressure when doing this. And in some ways it was tougher to write than the first one. I think the first one, was, I wrote the first draft in a pretty short amount of time. It obviously went through a ton of edits. But that first draft really happened quickly, much quicker than I've ever written anything, actually. And then when I was working on this one, yeah, there was some struggle involved. And I think part of it was really being aware that if you want people to stay invested in this story, you certainly don't want them to read book number 2 and say, wow, I really wish that was book number 1 or anything of the kind. So yeah, there's undeniable pressure there.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned talking to people about your series. So is there anything happening there, or are you in the Hollywood limbo situation, or?
Yeah, I'm living happily in Hollywood limbo. I get, once a year, so I get a very nice, lunch somewhere
That's nice.
in Beverly Hills. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, but things are going, and I've certainly learned, as anyone would tell you about the film and TV business, just be happy, take the whatever is being offered, try to make some wise choices about the people you're working with, and form no expectations whatsoever. So that's where I'm happily in Hollywood limbo. That would be a good title too, I think.
Take the win, Saul. Take the win.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So what are you working on now? What now, or are you just basking in the glow of One Got Away?
So when the pandemic hit last year, I started a new novel, and I grew up in a rural town in New Hampshire, like small town, dirt road, middle of the woods, no like shops or restaurants or anything like that. A town where everyone knew each other, and there just weren't that many people there. And I've always wanted to set a mystery there. And I, really thought when the pandemic hit, I was just on the tail end of, getting One Got Away into production. And so I had some time. In fact, I had a lot of time, probably more than I wanted, along with the rest of the world. And I thought, this is the right time to do this book. So I finished that up, just about a month ago, and have just, kind of sent it off. So in the very recent future. But it was fun to write, and I was actually living in this town of mine, Canaan, New Hampshire, for some of the spring and all of the summer. And so it gave me a kind of renewed appreciation for this town, to be able to be writing a book that in some ways was a kind of homage to where I grew up, and yet also to be living there while I was writing it, and to describe, like, there are no stoplights in the town. There's just one like blinking yellow light that kind of swings from its forlorn wire, in the middle of the like crossroads. And I'd write that moment or this scene, and then I'd drive in, and sure enough, there would be the light right where I remembered it. So, and other things maybe I didn't remember with quite the same clarity. So it was very interesting to be present in the same setting that I was trying to describe in the book. In terms of the book itself, just very loosely, a young family moves to town, and the wife has just taken a job at a private like secondary academy that's in the area, and the husband, we learn, is on hiatus, but he's been a cellist with the Boston Symphony. And so they have a young son, 4-year-old son, and they move to town, and they buy this idyllic farmhouse, just the farmhouse of their dreams, and it's old, and it's crumbling, and beautiful and glorious and spacious. And then the very first night, someone leaves a pie on their porch as a kind of welcoming, and they think, this is so cute, this is country life, what were we doing living in Boston all these years? Except there's a note on the pie, and the note says, I'm watching you, and none of you should be here. And that obviously sends the narrative in a very different direction. And this husband, this cellist, starts to suspect that his family is being watched from outside the house, and maybe even from inside the house. And it's the first piece of writing I've ever done that I think does have some very light overtones of horror. This idea, this creepy sensation that eyes are on you. And is there someone who's watching your wife? And is there someone who's watching your little son? And is there someone who's potentially even able to get into this big old house of yours? It's a lot harder to secure a big, farmhouse than a tiny little walk up in Boston. And so we start to feel, I think, some of his fear, but we also start to form some of our own questions about what he's telling us, and about his own background, and why he's no longer doing the job that he loves. And so I basically wanted to present the reader with a question as the book continues. Is the problem with this town that this family moved into, or is the problem with this family that moved into this town? And we have to keep reading to find out the truth of that, but it was a lot of fun for me to write.
You know, I think I can speak for everybody in saying, if you haven't read Saul's books, you're going to want to read them because they are really excellent. And before I turn you over to everybody, I have one question. And, you know, I always like to ask this question is I know you mentioned about your manuscript, but what secret can you tell us about you that people who are not here don't know or would be surprised to learn?
That's a great question. Let me think about this. Secrets that people would be surprised to learn. I think, let's see here. I've talked about
the one you told me the last time I asked that question. It had something to do with your facial hair. I think it was handlebar.
Oh gosh, I did. Please don't tell me I admitted to my handlebar
You did.
mustache.
I think I recall you admitting to sporting a handlebar mustache at one point.
There might be a photograph, but I'm going to use the word might, and I will absolutely never admit to guilt beyond that.
Do you think I would forget that?
This was in the early aughts. Life was crazy. I was actually when that happened, I was, in my defense, I was living out in Montana. I had nothing to do I'd finished grad school and thought kind of, what do I do next? And a friend of mine was working for the fire service out in Montana, living in this little trailer just under Glacier National Park in Kalispell. And he said, well, if you want to drive out here, rent's $200 a month. And I said, I got student loans. That sounds terrific. I'll see you in a week and a half. And so I drove out to Montana and, lived there for a period of time. And I suppose as I was living out there, this mustache was also populating itself along my face. So by the time I got back to the East Coast, I think a few people raised an eyebrow, but it's all part of the fun.
It was a homage to the West.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for being so generous and open. And I'm just going to see if anybody else has any questions.
Question.
And I'm going to turn it over to you because this is your, yeah. Barbara, you want to?
I have a question. When did you know that you wanted to be a writer, and why did you pick a female with a motorcycle in a mystery thriller instead of something else?
Yeah, for sure. So I think in terms of the first part one of that question, I knew pretty early on. I think is going back certainly to elementary school, I really felt that that's what I wanted to be doing. I remember when I was in 4th grade, the teacher gave us a creative writing assignment. She gave us a title called Lost in the Snowy Wilderness and said, go write, a story about this. And everyone was 10. So most people, dashed off a couple of paragraphs. And for me, my head was full of the, Jack London books that my father, had read to me, growing up, since I was too young to read myself. And so I went off and, a week and a half later came back with a 25-page document. I attempted an epic, I suppose it was. So that, so pretty early on, and, I knew that that's what I wanted to be doing. And I kind of felt that was the only career that would make me fully happy. There was nothing else, quite out there that I wanted with that same degree of urgency and determination. As far as Nikki, with the motorcycle and the PI, I think when I look back to some earlier bits of writing that I had done, some short stories, some shorter pieces and things like that, I can see traces of her somewhere in there. There's a couple, different female characters. They don't have her vocation. They don't have her, toughness or character, of course, but there's a couple characters I wrote, females with a penchant for motorcycles that have, I suppose I could call it a certain attitude, and they carry themselves a certain way. And they were always, fun for me to write. And so I think that was probably in the back of my mind when I decided to, make Nikki who she was. I've also, I motorcycle and spend many happy hours just riding around the hills, above Berkeley and Oakland. And so I guess part of it, I thought that's a fun way to, create a character who can also get around on two wheels and just be, one more, relatively small piece of her identity. I think that for when you're writing a protagonist, there's always this balance because you want them to be memorable, but you don't want them to be over the top. If you put in, 10 different crazy characteristics and mannerisms, then suddenly you're hitting the reader over the head with a very large hammer. And on the hammer are the words, "This is fiction. This is not real." And no one wants to be cudgeled with such a hammer. So I think you have to create a character and set it up in a way that allows someone to feel on a moment by moment basis that there's believability and there's realism. But at the same time, a lot of this stuff has been done many times by many people. And so you have to look for ways to give a bit of an edge and to stick in someone's mind a little bit more. So those were some of the thoughts going through my head as I was creating Nikki.
And she has an easier time finding place to park.
That's completely true. It is. And God knows in California that matters.
I'm completely jealous that she has a room upstairs from the bookstore because I don't. Mine just has a roof. So I'm totally jealous about that. Regarding the books that you refer to within your book, do you put much time? Does that take much time, or is it just spur of the moment when you get a character to a certain spot and you decide this would be the right thing to do?
For sure. So some of the books just seem very naturally to kind of flow into a specific scene, and sometimes I don't second guess it whatsoever. I think of a title and I think that's perfect and that's the way it should be. I think there's other moments certainly where like someone comes in, and if Nikki is thinking about what would be right for them, or if they're someone who doesn't know exactly what they want, there have been times when I have to spend a bit of time going through my mind and trying to figure out what might not just what do I enjoy, but like what might Nikki like, and also what might this character like, and then thinking of a couple of names to get in there. So sometimes it's very easy and sometimes it takes a bit of time.
Mm-hmm. Do you stay away from current books? Do you always refer back to older ones?
So that's a great question. To a certain extent, but not completely. I'll put in, every now and then I'll put in kind of a bit of a shout out, to someone relatively modern. But I do also, like, Nikki is someone who has a love and appreciation for a lot of the classics. And so I think in that sense, it becomes easier to work in some of the authors who are not around these days. But it's an interesting point you raised, because I didn't know when I started this series what the etiquette was. I didn't know, are you supposed to do this or not do this when it comes to, invoking, specific writers and things like that. And I didn't also want to be too obvious about it. If someone gives me a blurb, I don't want the reader to see their book sitting front and center in a shelf right when they walk in. And very frankly, the blurbs I have, they don't need my help anyway, so I don't think they're missing out, whatsoever. But I think that I had to kind of just figure out those things, as I went. And I just reminded myself at the end of the day, this is a woman who owns and runs a bookshop. And so, just try to make her making the choices that she would be making in that situation.
Mm-hmm. How about somebody else?
Is there what was a detective book you read growing up or anything that kind of made you excited about the detective story or style or anything like that?
Sure, absolutely. There's a good number of them. I think that for me growing up, The Maltese Falcon probably had more effect on me than any other book. And I've probably read it at this point, over half a dozen times, and always find something new to love in it. But I think that especially when I was younger, Dashiell Hammett and Sam Spade, or not always Sam Spade, depending on what the book is. yeah, I think that was, if I had to name a single name, that's what it would have been. And there were, many others that I loved. And I mean, like I mentioned Chandler and, Ross McDonald and, John McDonald. And there were, a lot of favorites I had. But yeah, if you held a gun to my head and said, name one book, I'd probably be giving you The Maltese Falcon.
Great.
So I have another question. So when you're writing these books, do you ever think my students are going to read these and they're going to be looking for all the things I'm teaching them to make sure I'm doing them right?
They I have had those concerns, and and definitely some students have read them and they send me a note, and it's always nice to see it. But yeah, that's definitely something I think about, and I'm sure at one point I'll get called out for breaking some egregious rule that I flunked someone for in the classroom. I've been designing. I usually teach pretty classic literature, like in the form of the short story. But I've been designing a mystery thriller course, and I've been sneaking in little bits of crime fiction into my syllabi the last few years. And it's actually very fun because when you're teaching fiction, you can remind people of some basic truths that they don't think about right away if they're brand new to fiction. And I get people every year in my classroom who are brand new to fiction, and I'll give them something very basic. I'll say, for example, in real life, someone can tell you something and they might not mean it. They might mean something slightly different. They might be lying through their teeth or anything in between. And the person being addressed might sense that, might not have a clue. So there's all kinds of, and they don't think that, I think when you're first writing a story, your instinct is to make what people are saying the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God. And then they have so much fun when I kind of push them and say, you can write a bad person, and that doesn't mean you're bad, and we're not going to workshop this and shame you or throw eggs at you or put you in the stocks for being awful as a human being to think of such a scenario. In fact, we might be kind of celebrating that story. It might be a lot of fun. So I like to remind my students, and I think that crime fiction is such a great way to do this, that you can have some fun with your characters, and the world is not populated exclusively by saints, and your fiction does not have to be either.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
Comment about your audiobook. After I read The Dangerous Men, then I went back and I listened to the audiobook. And of course, first of all, you have the best narrator, January Lavoie. I mean, how could you get a better name than that?
Whoa.
But she does such a good job, and she really brings forth the personal experience. And it's a very different Nikki that I listen to than the one that I read. And so I hope she does this book too.
Oh, she does, and I'm glad you said that, and I'll pass that on to her as well, because we've been in touch since the first book, and it was, yeah, she was just a perfect person. I give complete credit to Macmillan Audio, because they go through a long list of names and they try to figure out who the right person is. And what you said nails. I mean, January is an actress. I mean, she's done tons of work in television. She's done tons of amazing audiobooks. And she really brings that, actress sensibility, to dialogue and to, anything that she's reading. And yeah, I think that she really brings the story just so three-dimensional. She really lifts it off the page. From the first moment I heard her reading the first chapter of book one, I thought, she's just so perfect for it. And I couldn't have imagined someone else doing the second book. So I was very happy that January was on board for it.
Good to hear, because we have a lot of people that listen to books, so they'll be interested in hearing that. Anything else? Maddie, did you have any more that you wanted to go over?
No, I think everybody has a really good sense of Saul and his work.
I agree.
And hopefully everybody feels like I do and wants to support him in his efforts, so that we can keep reading books written by him. So
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Also look forward to the next book, which you haven't mentioned at all, except you're doing the standalone.
Yes, I'm doing the standalone, but I've plenty more Nikki ideas in the pipe as well.
And what I'm looking forward to is when we can have you for an event at the store.
I would love that, and I hope very much that this calendar year. I mean, things are looking better and better. I'd love to get down there, and I'm going to make Maddie take me to at least one happy hour as well.
Well,
But-
she'll know
but
where
I'll-
to do it.
We'll make sure he
Yeah.
signs the books before happy hour, though.
Yes, we will.
Yes, we'll
make
do.
sure of that.
We'll do the store event and then the happy hour.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I'll stay and take care of the books.
Oh, no, Anne, you're going to be Nikki Griffin. You're coming with us. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
we'll talk about that. I want to thank you both so much. Maddie, you always do a bang up job of interviewing. And Saul, it was such a pleasure meeting you and hearing about your work. And we'll be having you back again, I hope. Does anybody else, before you, last chance, do you have anything else you want to ask him? Okay,
You
you did
have,
such a
you
good job. I'm
have
sorry.
his books, right?
Yes, definitely. Both of them.
Anne, do you have any signed copies? Do you have a signed copy?
No, no.
Do you,
I was
does
hoping.
does Saul have any frontispieces he can send?
Well, I was going to ask him for some book plates. That's what everyone's been doing for me.
Oh, sure. I'd be more than happy to. Just let me know anything that I can send down, and I'd be excited to.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. It was a great evening.
was fun.
Great time. Thank you.
Yeah, and
Thank
thank
you,
you so
Anne.
much, Anne, for hosting this, and Maddie, thanks so much for a great conversation. That's
Exactly.
always
You
fun
made
to
a
chat.
good team.
It's always fun.
All right.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Oh, so I can order that on your website,
Yes, you can.
and you'll send him some book plates?
Well, he'll now talk about it. He may have some from the publisher. If not, yes, I can do that.
Okay, great. That would be
Yeah.
very good. Thank you.
Wonderful. You're welcome. Bye now.
Bye-bye.